Welcome to Drinks and Diplomacy, where we're cheersing to the impact of local exchanges.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea Vanessa Castillo, and I am a program officer at World Oregon. So excited to be here with you today. And I am here with my co-host, Tim.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the Drinks and Diplomacy podcast. I am Tim Horgan and the Executive Director of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire. We're really excited to get another program, another episode here going and to dive into some really interesting conversations about the impact of local exchanges. So today I am drinking because of my experience in Monterrey, Mexico on study abroad. My favorite beer from that city, Sol. It's a nice light Mexican beer, similar to Corona, but pretty much no one anyway in Monterrey drinks Corona. They prefer the local brew, and it's just a great way to sort of celebrate what feels like summer coming out of the holidays here. And yeah, it's just a fun way to remember the impact that my exchange experience had on me. It was really one of the most life-changing experiences to spend 6 months in another country, in another culture, not only learning about that culture, but continuing to learn the language. One of my favorite stories is at the end of my experience, I was talking with one of my friends, and he said, "You know, Tim, at the start of all of this, I had to stop myself from laughing when I heard you speak Spanish because you were making mistakes that like a 5-year-old would make, but I knew you were learning, so it was totally understandable. But now you could totally pass for a native Spanish speaker." And so that was really cool to have that experience. You know, I got to play on intramural soccer teams with people from Mexico. I am not a good soccer player. I will put that out there right now. And that was made very clear to me when I was told that, well, at least Tim tries hard. But it was just an awesome experience and a great way to learn about another culture by immersing yourself in it through study abroad. So Andrea, what are you drinking today?
Yeah, that's so amazing to hear, Tim. And I'm going to share my drink, which is more on the local side of things. So I have with me a recipe that I love sharing with visitors whenever they come. It's chocolate Ibarra or chocolate caliente, hot chocolate. And so it also has a little bit of ranchata in there just for a little bit of spice. For drinks and diplomacy, got to have a little bit of something in there. And usually I don't include that in my recipes, though I will share. And so this is a drink that really means home to me. And so when I'm thinking about local and global exchange, I was really like pondering like, okay, so what would I share with a visitor to showcase a little bit of that side of myself? And growing up, this is a drink that I would share with my abuela, my grandma, and she would make it for us. She would add a little bit of whipped cream, but for me, a lot because I love whipped cream. And so you use what's called Ibarra. It's a chocolate made in Mexico, or you use chocolate abuelita, which is made in the United States. And there's like a tension between which one you use. And so some people feel very strongly about chocolate abuelita. Some people feel very strongly about using Ibarra because it's from Mexico. Anyone you talk to, you might hear something different.
And so what's where are you on this debate? Where do you fall?
Okay, I fall in this might start a little bit of something. So if you're in my family and you're listening right now, I'm so sorry, but not really. So I fall in the Ibarra side. I like the richness. I actually don't like chocolate overall, but because of the sentiment that this has, I just like the flavoring of Ibarra. But if I'm with a whole group of my family, they will say they prefer the abuelita because it's more sweet. So it's just depending on your tastes and everything. Like you have to like boil the milk and then you add in the pieces, the chunks of chocolate, and you kind of mush them in. And once it's all mixed in, you might add like a little bit of vanilla, you might add some nutmeg, just depending on your taste. But then you have to blend it. And so it gets the frothiness of the hot chocolate. But yeah, it really means a lot to me, and I'm really excited to share it with you all. I will put the link in the description. And as we're talking a little bit about local and global exchanges, I'm super excited to introduce Janine Branch, who is here with us today. And I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what drink that you have as you're joining us for today's conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Andrea and Tim, for having me. Like you mentioned, my name is Janine Branch, and I'm a senior program officer at FHI 360, and I also am the Onboarding Champion for the Global Connections Department. So my drink today is very local, and it is just a plain sweet tea, a homemade sweet tea. So for people who have grown up, like, it's a really traditional Black American summer drink. And being that we just celebrated the 4th of July, we had crabs and a cookout yesterday. So we had some fresh sweet tea on tap. But this is such a not just a holiday, but for me, like Andrea, you were saying, it reminds you of your grandmother. So this is such a testimony to spending summers in New York with my grandparents growing up, and just sitting by the pool, eating hot dogs with sweet tea and maybe some mac and cheese or something just truly just summer salads or something like that. But it's just a good memory of just reminiscing about youth and growing up and spending time with my grandparents in New York. Not so much international, but it's definitely one of my favorite drinks to share with visitors, because there's so many that have tea in different ways, but iced tea is not one of those drinks that many visitors drink at all. And then, of course, if you treat it real Southern-like, you add at least 2 to 3 cups of sugar and 10 tea bags. It's really, really sweet. So it's always a shock. And I'm like, I just give out little shot glasses of sweet tea as people are like trying to taste it. I'm like, just take a little shot. Tell me how you think, because it's very sweet.
Yeah, one of the favorite misconceptions or things that visitors seem to be always surprised about is the fact that we put so much ice in every single drink, even if it is the middle of winter in the northern part of the country and it's negative 10 degrees outside. We need our ice in our water. And they are like, what are you doing? This makes no sense to me. Yeah, I'm glad that you bring up that visitors are surprised by the iced tea part of things there.
Yes. It's definitely an experience to share. And I always love it because we always get the spectrum of, oh my gosh, this is too sweet. Or I've never had this before. Can I have some more? How do I replicate this? So it's always a lot of fun to share one of my favorite drinks with participants.
What is in your mind? I know you said you can go up to 2 to 3 cups of sugar, but what in your mind is the right ratio there?
Well, it depends on how much you're making. I think my husband made about a gallon, so he probably did put about 2.5 cups. So we used to have like this big pitcher, and like at least the entire bottom layer had to be sugar. So you let the sugar sit with the tea, and then you add water to kind of water it down. So
another interesting question here, is there a proper type of sugar to use? There's so many different sugars out there.
So yes, you got to use the regular cane sugar. This time we ran out, so my husband actually tried brown sugar, which is not as sweet, but it does taste great. So yeah, but I would be remiss to say my grandmother, my mother-in-law, rest her soul, my father-in-law, rest his soul as well. If we didn't put regular sugar in it and they were around, go home.
I love all the little nuances that come with these recipes that you get from home. There's just things that you just need to do, you know?
Yes. And the important part is if you don't let the tea bag sit in the sugar water, it's not going to be good. They have to at least sit and soak and simmer for at least 25 to 30 minutes before you can actually finish off your iced tea.
There we go. All right. Good tips for making your own sweet tea at home. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm really excited to get into this conversation because all of us have had such great experiences working on the State Department's International Visitor Leadership Program. I know we all have wonderful stories that we're itching to tell about some of the ways in which these programs have really impacted our organizations, our communities, and the people that we work with. So why don't we throw it over to you, Janine, in order to kick this conversation off to talk about a little bit why you do the work and what experiences you've had with international changes.
Yeah, so I like to say that I'm a servant leader. So I think that really applies to the work in public diplomacy and international exchanges. It's serving your team and you're even serving your client before serving yourself. And I think that's a really necessary mindset, especially when you're in the nonprofit world, to be a servant leader. For me, how I got involved with exchanges and why I do what I do is I am naturally an event planner. When people always ask, like, what do you do? For the longest, it was so difficult to explain I work with the US Department of State, but I'm not a federal employee. I work at a nonprofit. So I really boil it down in the most simplistic form of I'm an event planner. And that's really where I got my start in doing exchanges. Is I really treat them as small scale events. That's what I really transition it to, from large scale events, even events in the academic world when I was in college and in undergrad and grad school. It's a lot of fun planning those types of events.
Yeah,
I love that.
You mentioned you work for a nonprofit. We all work for nonprofits. Can you talk about the importance of the nonprofit network as managed by Global Ties US to this work, and why the State Department has made the decision to farm this out to a nonprofit network?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest reason why the State Department uses the nonprofit network goes back to the Fulbright-Hays Act of 1961. So it's written in Congress, and I don't know all of the political science terms, but it's actually enacted that exchange programs cannot be implemented solely by the Department of State, but they have to collaborate with on the ground community-based members, or CBMs like we typically have, and nonprofit organizations. So that led to the creation of what is now Global Ties US, that manages the membership of subgrantees like World Oregon, and the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire, for you guys to work with. I work at FHI 360, which holds a subcontract directly with the State Department as well to host these international visitors. So I think it is so integral for the State Department to continue these relationships with nonprofits, whether not in Washington, D.C., but on the ground in the community, because there's absolutely no way that one agency can serve so many populations and subsets of the United States. Being that I actually used to work at the Maryland community-based member, I feel that as an event planner, I'm an expert on various topics related to the state of Maryland. And that's what we all are doing in our network, and building those authentic relationships and creating these environments to change perspectives and to have conversations. And unfortunately, a federal agency isn't going to be able to facilitate those types of authentic conversations. It's definitely helpful to throw the names around, but when you can be at a local level and say I'm in Maryland and I can connect with the CEO of any organization and have them meet with a group, that's just going to create this authentic bond for relationships to continue to grow.
Wonderful. Janine, so you started to talk a little bit about the impacts of exchange a little bit, and just how it's so integral to have that local connection when you're talking about these exchanges, right? And so I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about what does it look like for somebody who's just coming in to understanding exchanges. What does a program look like? What are the key factors, key pieces of those that really make an exchange, foster that two-way piece of things?
There's so many aspects to really the key factors that foster exchange, or the key kind of components. First and foremost, I think that all programs really start with this formal introduction many visitors that we have, their cultures of professionalism might be a little bit more serious than, say, in the United States. So I think that that's a really integral component of the program. Of this first whole day that they're in the United States, they are being welcomed by their State Department program officer. They're being taken to lunch. They're having a keynote speaker or a federalism speaker. That is something that is cohesive across all 5,000 visitors in the IVLP network that come annually. Is every single group has this first day of introductions and welcomes. And it doesn't matter if you're from Japan or Nigeria or Colombia, everyone receives the same kind of welcome. And I think that is really important to instill to them the importance of them, not just the project, but they are important on becoming a part of this network. Other components and factors that I feel that are really important across all of our projects are just meeting with the people. I love volunteer programs and I love volunteering with my visitors. I think some of my most favorite memories of visitors are volunteering to remove invasive species in Jug Bay in Maryland, and learning that majority of those visitors had farms where they were at, and they were like, some of them came to pull invasive species with like thorns and flip-flops, but they were also in their suits. So it was really cool to learn about just farming techniques from other countries, but then also help the environment here in the state of Maryland. I personally really love volunteering with other volunteers and meeting with community-based members. And as simple as it might seem, that first day of official welcome, it really allows the visitors, no matter where they're from, the importance of their story and the importance of their opportunity to continue on to this narrative or this story that they're learning throughout their city stops that they visit.
I love you bringing up the differences in cultures and differences in expectations of what's going to go on. It really makes me remember the differences in time management that occur throughout the world. So one of my favorite stories around that is a group from Pakistan. Their interpreter told me basically, if you show up to a meeting on time in Pakistan, you are actually 2 hours early. And so just trying to like navigate that and make sure that visitors understand, okay, when we say we're leaving at 10 a.m. to go to our meeting, that means 10 a.m., not 10:15, not 9:50. It means 10 a.m. And the number of times I fudged the numbers in our schedule to say we're leaving at 10 a.m., but really we don't need to leave till 10:30 because I know you people are going to be late. Really? Is a lot of fun to try and manage all of that and predict where a group will fall along those lines.
And the fun thing is that too, that changes depending on where you are in the United States. There's such a, a difference in how visitors experience life in DC versus life in Oregon, and just the culture. You can be in the same country, but depending on the state that you're in, you might understand that jeans are acceptable in professional meetings and jeans are not acceptable in certain meetings.
Yes. And that, I think, goes back to that official welcome. And for me, whenever I facilitate these openings, I really try to make them feel comfortable. And I always go around the room and like, okay, whatever you guys are wearing today, this is fine. You could go you can go even more casual. So they kind of can have an idea of how comfortable can they be at the various communities they visit. Or another funny thing that I always find that I have to remind visitors is to help yourself. That is something, that phrase is such a US phrase. So whenever I've hosted particularly other types of exchanges, not so much the IVLP, when we have visitors that are living in homes and their homestay families are like, okay, there isn't a meal being served, but you can go in the refrigerator and get something to eat. I actually have had visitors not eat for like a day or two until we have to sit down and explain, no, help yourself means that you live here now. So go in the pantry and grab something to eat if you want a snack.
Well, that leads me, I think, to a great opportunity for us to share some of the more ridiculous things we've seen in our exchanges and how they highlight some of the unique aspects of the ability for these exchanges to really impact understanding. So I don't know, Andrea, why don't you kick us off with that? And then Janine and I've got one to round it out there.
Definitely. Oh, I'm more than happy to. It's so interesting when I get these questions about like, what is a highlight from an exchange that you've had? Because there's so many. I think that just the nuances that depending on what type of program that you get, you always have a different experience, right? And so I remember when I was an intern, actually in summer of 2019, I was working on an exchange project where during the day, we were going to volunteer at the Oregon Food Bank. And so it was just super fun, like you were talking about earlier, Janine, to experience the visitors volunteering alongside youth and adults inside of our community, to talk a little bit about what that looks like. And this particular exchange was with high schoolers from Bolivia and Peru. And so these students were all packaging different types of fruits and vegetables, and our station was to pack the onions. So we were sitting there, and as soon as the program was over that day, we had a very fancy banquet to get to after. So we were trying to be as distant as possible so that we do not end up with the onion residue smelling on us before we go directly to a banquet afterwards, which is supposed to be pretty nice. And so just being able to understand that in any given day, there can be one certain type of event where either you're at the beach or you're volunteering or you're meeting with the CEO of whoever is in your state that's really aligning with the visitors' objectives. And then you're going to a dinner event right afterwards, or you're doing a home hospitality event, making sure that you are coordinating the transportation to somebody who's local in your community that's opening their home to a visitor to share a meal over. And I love that piece of things. So what about you, Janine? Do you have a highlight?
Yes, I have two really quick ones. So the very first one would be the first time my husband and I hosted a visitor overnight. So we hosted an open world visitor, Bogdan, his name, and he's from Ukraine. And we actually hosted him when our son was 1 year old and his daughter was 2. So first and foremost, it was just an exciting experience just to have a guest, but then another father in the family. We didn't speak much Ukrainian and he didn't speak much English, but for the 2 weeks that he was at home, the unifying aspect was children and fatherhood. So him and my husband really bonded over diaper changes and the baby crying at night and things of that nature. So that would be one of the personal highlights. And then just another kind of relationship aspect, my favorite lunches that I've had with visitors, there was a young lady from, I think she was from Mexico, and there was me and then the State Department program officer. And we ended up talking about the Spice Girls and the important aspect of growing up with the Spice Girls. And mind you, you got me, I'm at a nonprofit. You have this kind of high level official in Mexico, and then you have this high level official from the State Department, and we're singing the Spice Girls over lunch.
What song? You gotta give us a song.
Wannabe. so it was just such a fun experience because, you know, we always talk about the similarities and the differences and growing up in so many different cultures and how things are different, but then also how things are the same. And music is such a universal language. No matter where you are, it transcends so many boundaries. And just that moment during lunch where we just all started singing the same song and just really authentically cracking up and just enjoying life together in that moment meant so much to me. And I think it also meant so much to, it was a good relationship builder between myself and the State Department program officer. And then we got to do it with our visitor and really warm up the entire group as well.
So I think we can start our competition now that James Corden is, leaving carpool karaoke behind. We'll have to get some IVLP karaoke going, and that can be like our follow-on to the Drinks and Diplomacy podcast here.
I hear this. Yes, I hear a lot of visitors love karaoke.
There we go. Good. Well, for me, I've got two that I'd like to share as well. The first one is really indicative of some of the unique misconceptions that visitors have had of the US and how we live our lives. And I think that's one of the really important parts of exchanges, is dispelling myths and making people better understand how everyday people live, that we don't all live in giant cities and hate our families, as one group from Japan believed. More interestingly, we had a group from Russia, and they really wanted to meet with the state police to talk about the cool technology that the police get to use and see all of that. And so we set that up for them, and they got to see the cars with all the tech. They got to see the forensics lab and everything that goes on there, which does not look anything like what you see on, any of those police shows. They seemed to have a good time. And when we left, I was talking to them afterwards and said, "Oh, did that meet your expectations?" And they said, "Well, it was good, but we thought we'd see the really cool technology, like in the Die Hard movies." Okay, not how police work actually happens here in the US. So that was a really interesting one, and really highlights sort of the opportunity to dispel some myths. And then the other really cool one came from a home hospitality host who had planned on going to South Africa a couple of months, and she saw that we were hosting a group from South Africa, so she really wanted to have them over for dinner. And so it was a great opportunity to meet some people from a country that she was going to visit. She actually ended up meeting up with one of her visitors when she did make her trip. And the cool thing to come out of that is that she was able to go to the wedding of the president to his fourth wife. It was a 4-day long event, and she got to see, for the first couple of days, all of these international dignitaries and celebrities that she recognized. But the fourth day was very traditional, very, family oriented, and a much smaller affair. And she was pretty much the only white person there, which was a really interesting and unique experience that never would have happened unless she had met these people through this exchange program. So while not every single person has that experience with their home hospitality hosts, you never know until you host someone and then go visit their country what cool opportunities might come from that.
Yeah, definitely. And, one of the things that makes me think about is maybe it would be helpful for us to kind of walk through what kinds of exchanges there are. So Janine and Tim have talked a little bit about our adult exchanges. I've talked a little bit about youth exchanges. And then to add more nuance, we have spent the past 2.5 years hosting virtual exchanges. And in summer of 2020, I was actually a participant as an adult mentor of a virtual exchange with young leaders in Uruguay. And so a piece of that was coordinating language learning labs and being able to talk about a way that we can share a recipe and cook together virtually. And by the end of it, I was teaching them a TikTok dance. And that was our way to wrap up our program, So Janine, if you could take some time just talking about the different types of exchanges there are for those that are listening.
I have been very blessed to have the opportunity to start my career off at the World Trade Center Institute in Baltimore. And there we focused a lot on diversification. So obviously our mainstay program was the International Visitor Leadership Program. We also hosted Community Connections with World Learning, which is another nonprofit. So that group typically spent 3 weeks in Maryland living in volunteer home stay families as adults. I've had so many. We always used to take them to New York for the weekend and the beach. So those are always the best part. I mean, obviously all the meetings are great, but these visitors are from many countries that don't have oceans. So I would always bring them through Bethany Beach or Rehoboth Beach in Delaware. And to see visitors who have never seen the ocean before, let me tell you, it doesn't matter if they're 70 or 25, they become little tiny children, and it didn't matter if it was in the fall or the summer or the spring, they still would get in the water. But then also I've taken them to New York, and just about every group wants to see The Lion King. So I've probably seen The Lion King on Broadway, give or take 15 times. So you have those. There's also youth programming, like you've mentioned. The program that I'm most familiar with is Jóvenes en Acción, which is a partnership with the Mexican Secretary of Education and the U.S. Department of Education, where we brought youth to do summer programs here in the state of Maryland. And then there's also private fee-for-service opportunities. So, for example, one of my colleagues had a partnership with the University of Jos in Nigeria. So we had mass communication students that actually spent, I want to say, about 2 weeks here in the United States learning about mass comm majors and what you can do with your career. They were undergrad students, and when they went back, they finished up their degree, and it was a really unique project. And I always, the joy out of that project is 2 of the participants actually got married. They never knew each other beforehand. So there's so many different types of exchanges. And then you bring up virtual, and the opportunity that virtual brings is just fascinating. I hosted a physician who was the only physician on the island that she lives in. So she would work doubles, and then she would take her Zoom calls at her desk in the hospital in the ER. So for her, it's really physically unable to travel to the United States for an exchange program. And the importance of participating in this learning experience, particularly that project was public health in the COVID era. She made time with her little AirPod in one ear, in her scrubs. You would see gurneys rolling past her, nurses nudging her to get signatures. It made me realize the impact of virtual program and how important it is. And then the other part of the virtual that I had the joy to do is I hosted 2 alumni events. I had the opportunity to reconnect with a lot of visitors that I haven't talked to in a long time across the entire network. So that's something that all exchanges have been trying to work on, is building those relationships with the alumni, and having these online seminars and sessions was really important. And we did that in the field of education. So in the education in the era of COVID, and then climate change, which is also very important to talk about. So it was really nice to reconnect with those participants who have been alumni in the past.
And speaking of alumni, it's important to not only talk about the impact that these exchange programs have on our visitors, but also on our own communities. We see these partnerships being built around the world. We see even just economic benefits coming to our local areas. Any insights you can provide on what those benefits look like, and any good stories around maybe some partnerships that have been fostered through these programs?
Yes, I do. In 2012, I had a Haitian delegation 2 years after the earthquake that came over, and their project was on change makers, reinvigorating young adults to get involved in the workplace. And it's just that project really reiterates what a phone call can do. So it was literally a cold call to a local ice cream company in Baltimore called Taharka Brothers. In 2012, that turned into an entire initiative, with Taharka Brothers being the only US-based company to ever export directly from Haiti. And it was me just calling Taharka Brothers, going to the session, and that actually is it's an ice cream, a scoop shop. They make the ice cream out of their warehouse, and then they partner with scoop shops around the state of Maryland and Virginia and universities in Washington, D.C. And they were so inspired by the visitors from Haiti and how they were trying to help the economy become better in Haiti after the earthquake. Whereas Taharka Brothers, their whole initiative is about ice cream with a purpose. So in one hat, they are creating ice cream flavors that are reminiscent of wonderful African-American leaders throughout history. So they might have an ice cream that is Billie Holiday's favorite flavors into an ice cream, or Langston Hughes, and all of their ice cream flavors have a story. But the really unique part of Taharka Brothers is that they are employed by youth, high school students. So, for example, their director of marketing was 16-year-old Chris. Their head chef is still Kofi. When I met him, he was 22, I think. And you have to keep your grades up to work there. And if you don't keep your grades up, you're put on, kind of temporary leave until you can get your grades up. So it's just this really unique kind of vision of both of the visitors and Taharka brothers. They all came together across borders to realize they're doing the same kind of aspect. And the visitors, the Taharka brother employees, were so inspired that they created this huge initiative called the Big Payback. And because they continue to learn about Haiti and learn how Haiti was the first slave country to free themselves, and they decided that they need to promote that narrative. Literally, again, I did a Google search and a quick phone call. Taharka brothers did a quick Google search on can you buy cocoa from Haiti? And they connected with a lovely mother and daughter team. Their company was called De La Soul Haiti, where they had spent the last 10 years vacationing in Dominican Republic until they were assaulted in their hotel room overnight. They were drugged, assaulted, their belongings were taken, and they decided, we love this island. Why don't we go to the Haiti side and see what it's like there? So long story short, they've been there for a long time. They helped build a school, helped give back to the community, and then they introduced the vanilla bean that grows on the cacao tree. And Taharka brothers literally is just Googling, can you get vanilla from Haiti? Can you get cacao from Haiti? Because those are the two most used ingredients in ice cream. And a quick cold call is hi, I'm an ice cream company. I see that you guys are starting to grow vanilla and cacao. Can we buy some? Turned into basically a 4-year initiative, which won them both Citizen Diplomacy Awards through Global Ties US and a couple of additional awards from USDA, because like I mentioned, Taharka Brothers is the only company that exports directly from farmers. And this relationship has created enough income to support, I think, 28 families. Each cacao tree is the value of a cow.
I feel like just hearing about different types of testimonies like that, I feel like with the collection of experience you, Janine, Tim, and I have, we could be talking about exchanges all day. But for the purposes of this episode, with the time that we have remaining, I would love to throw this final question out to both you, Janine, and to Tim, just to talk about, we've outlined professional meetings, home hospitality, virtual engagement, and all sorts of opportunities for folks living off the streets of Hillsborough in Oregon to really get engaged and understand what it means to be involved with these programs. And so I'd love to hear about why you think, if it hasn't been laid out already throughout this episode, folks should get involved or care about international exchange, diplomacy through exchanges, and how folks can learn about and get engaged if they're wanting to.
I think that it's so important to be involved with initiatives like exchanges, because at the end of the day, we are a global society. There are so many similarities and challenges that we all face on a day-to-day basis. And for me, it feels like a unifying component of life, even in times of stress or conflict, like COVID or the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Being able to not just mourn the loss or the conflict, but to actually be able to connect with people that you've hosted in your home. Like I mentioned, my visitor from Ukraine, Bogdan, who's the first person I called, who's the first person I reached out to him to see how him and his daughter and his wife were. So I think that because I'm involved with exchanges, it makes me and my family realize that the world isn't as big as it's made out to seem, and that anything can happen to anybody in the world, but knowing that you have a connection, or at least they have a connection with you, that somebody is thinking about them. Or I've been reached out so many times of whatever mass shooting has happened, especially in schools, with my husband being an educator and my son in public schools. So even those small little Facebook messages, or even Mother's Day, things of that nature, it makes me know that this is where I'm supposed to be. Because again, it goes back to those similarities and just being able to resonate with people, because we're so similar, regardless on the language and the space that we're from. And it just keeps you happy, I think, to know. And to answer your second part of the question is, how do you get involved and engaged? I'm very passionate about interns and paying it forward to the next generation, because one day we're going to be old and retired and not have the capacity anymore. So it's really passing the passion and the energy of doing this to the next generation of leaders, and starting now, not waiting until we're in our 50s and our 60s to start training up and teaching up, but rising up the future leaders as we rise up ourselves in our industries. But if you're not a student, if you're not in undergrad or high school or grad school, the best bet is to find your local community-based member, become a member, volunteer, and keep in touch, because again, you never know whether or not you're going to have a future Nobel Prize winner at your dinner table, or if we even look back to the current political world right now, you might have a Jacinda Ardern sitting across your table, or anybody else that are among the many, many, many alumni that are really well known or may not be well known, or CNN Hero of the Year. There's been several alumni that have been CNN Heroes of the Year. So a lot of ways to get involved. Check your local community if there's any community-based members, and just jump in.
We'll throw out the link in the episode description to Global Ties US's membership list, so you can check out exactly who is a part of this great network of organizations and find your closest one to get involved with. And I'd just like to add that a lot of these exchanges, traditionally, people have looked at as a one-way exchange, where we are the ones who are training other people on how to do things and what the best practices are. And really, in the past decade or so, we've seen a shift in that. And I think it's a really important shift to make these two-way exchanges, to recognize that we as Americans do a lot of things really well, but we also don't have all of the answers. And as we continue down our journeys of diversity, equity, inclusion, we have so much to learn from other people and their experiences. And while similarly to the visitors whose experiences might not fit exactly what's going on here in the US, and so they have to adapt what we're telling them, what we're showing them, to their own personal experiences, we can do the same thing. You end up with so many opportunities to just learn from others, learn from these experiences and the challenges that they face, because a lot of the challenges that we hear about are similar to what we see here in the US. It just may be a difference of scale and importance and where the issues are. But we have that opportunity to learn. We have that opportunity to share, and you can come up with some really great partnerships, as Janine pointed out, that can benefit everyone. And I really do hope people take the opportunity to get involved in different ways, because there is just so much you can learn, even if it is just hosting some visitors in your home from another country that you never would have visited, and you have the opportunity to learn about the realities of life in their country. It's a great way to travel without leaving your home and learning more about what's going on around the world, which is really important. Drea, how about you? Any final thoughts?
No, I was just saying, wonderfully said, Tim. Thank you for outlining all of that. And Janine, I was just thinking that that's part of the reason why we're doing this podcast, right? Is to really showcase and understand that there's so many ways, so many places for us to really understand that we don't all know everything, and we're all trying to learn together, experience life together, and utilizing each other's experience to really foster that within the community. And so I came into the exchange world with no international travel in my bag. I didn't study international studies or foreign affairs. I came in with the cultural anthropology background, general social sciences. And so the world of travel I'm a very homebody, stayed in Oregon, lived in Oregon all my life. And this has been the one exposure for me to really understand that even though I do plan on going out of the country in the future, this is one way for me to really see and understand just how rich and beautiful the rest of the world is. And I will never forget how on my first exchange as an intern in 2019 in the summer, I had a group of folks from Azerbaijan come. I think I talked about this in the first episode, and they were talking to me and they were like, do you have family? Azerbaijani family? And I was like, I don't. I'm born and raised in Oregon. My family's from Mexico. And they were like, oh, you just have your facial features look so similar to a lot of folks that are back in our home country. And just understanding like, this is my first time engaging from anybody in Azerbaijan, but also that there was just that piece of things. Like there's something so familiar, even though we live across a whole ocean, being able to understand that piece of things. And regardless of the background that you come from, there's always a piece of these exchanges that really brings out a whole other part of you, the curiosity, the yearning for something else that really gets fulfilled with these exchanges. And I'm really grateful to have been exposed to this community. And I'm really looking forward to the direction that we're going, especially understanding that we're taking an intentional step to look back, look at our history. Where have we come from and where are we going? And how does that make an impact in the decisions that we make? So there's so many rich things that we can take away from exchanges. And I'm really thankful, Janine, for you taking the time to be here, to share your experience with us, and to be a part of this next step of learning as we're putting together and wrapping up this podcast.
Thank you. And Andrea, I'm glad you mentioned all of those components of not being in the background of international relations. And I have a business background, and I find that many people that I coach and I mentor are, I need to go do the Peace Corps. I need to take the Foreign Service exam. And I think getting involved with exchanges is just another way to get involved with public diplomacy. So being a change maker doesn't mean that you have to stir the pot. It doesn't mean that you have to serve in a political role. It doesn't mean that you have to work in an embassy or spend 26 months abroad in a Peace Corps opportunity. Those are wonderful opportunities, but for some people that's not in their narrative. So I always say we are steering the pot and creating these narratives and opportunities for us as people in the United States and visitors from all over the world to really build authentic relationships. And for us as programmers, it's such a unique opportunity to uplift and nurture others. And we are really creating these thoughtful and engaging opportunities for each one of our communities to tell a story that is uniquely ours and go beyond the surface level. And that, at the end of the day, is the premise of why we probably all do what we do, is to make change and do so authentically and to have fun while doing it.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode. We really appreciate it, and we hope that you found this useful and enlightening. I cannot wait to see you all get more involved in the Global Ties US network or other exchanges and meet people from around the world, share experiences, share cultures, and really grow from these wonderful opportunities that are provided. As we finish up here, we've got a little tradition that we've started, and it's an opportunity to just really tie in our drinks and diplomacy portion of this podcast. So we'll finish up with a little bit of a quick cheers. Take whatever term you want to use towards that, whatever language you may want to do it in. We invite our audience to join us in this, but I'll give you a little countdown and we'll pull this off beautifully with no problems. All right. So 3, 2, 1, salud.
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 All right. Thanks so much. The Drinks and Diplomacy podcast is a joint program of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire and World Oregon.
Your co-hosts and producers are Andrea Castillo, Program Officer at World Oregon, and Tim Horgan, Executive Director of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire.
The audio editor is Tim Horgan.
Our theme music is We Are One by Scott Holmes Music.
Thank you so much for listening, and don't forget to subscribe and leave us a comment. Until next time.